Once known for its vibrant culture, stunning architecture, and thriving neighborhoods, Melbourne has now become the epicenter of a disturbing crime wave that's challenging its reputation as one of the world's safest cities. From violent muggings in broad daylight to violent altercations in public spaces, how did this once peaceful city descend into a place where crime seems to be spiraling out of control? The rise in crime has left the residents, business owners, and even tourists wondering, what happened to the Melbourne they once knew? This was a city that, for years, was held up as a beacon of safety and opportunity. It was a city where families felt secure walking down the street, where tourists flocked to explore the laneways and dine in the bustling cafes. Melbourne has been repeatedly ranked among the world's most livable cities. But now something has shifted. The once bustling, vibrant streets now feel shadowed by a growing sense of fear. Crime rates are climbing, and with each new headline, the reputation of a city that was once so trusted is slipping away. In the past few years, violent crime has steadily risen across the city. From armed robberies in public parks to random assaults in the heart of Melbourne's downtown, no area has been left untouched. Shops, restaurants, and even public transport have become hotspots for crime, leaving the city's residents uneasy about their safety. In neighborhoods that were once considered havens of tranquility, people now wonder if it's even safe to walk the streets at night. How did Melbourne, once celebrated for its welcoming, safe atmosphere, become a place where fear now lingers just beneath the surface? But what caused this sudden rise in crime? Is this a permanent shift in Melbourne's future, or is it a temporary challenge that the city can recover from? What do these rising crime rates mean for the people who call this city home? The families, the students, the professionals who used to walk down streets with little fear. And most importantly, can Melbourne restore its safety reputation? Or has the city changed forever? These are the questions we'll explore today on True Time Saga. But before we dive deeper into the story, make sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on more in-depth analysis of real crime stories. And let us know in the comments, do you think Melbourne can reclaim its safe reputation? Or is this the new normal for the city? Now, let's explore the rising crime rates in Melbourne and how they are affecting the lives of its residents. For years, Melbourne stood as a symbol of success and vibrancy. It was consistently ranked as one of the world's most livable cities, a place where residents took pride in their safe streets, low crime rates, and a strong economy. The city's vibrant arts scene, diverse culture, and high standard of living made it not just a hub of creativity and business, but also a model for other cities around the world to follow. Whether you were a local enjoying the cafe culture or a tourist soaking in the beautiful sights, Melbourne offered a sense of security and belonging. But in recent years, that once sturdy reputation has begun to crumble. Crime rates, particularly violent crimes, have surged. What was once a peaceful, well-controlled city is now facing an uncomfortable truth. Crime is rising, and it's happening in places where people once felt safe. Reports of thefts, assaults, and robberies are on the rise, and these incidents are no longer isolated to specific neighborhoods. They're happening all across the city, even in areas once thought to be untouchable. The rise in violence is not just a matter of statistics. It's a growing concern among Melbourne residents. Families who once felt safe walking the streets after dark now feel the weight of uncertainty. Tourists, once drawn to the city for its safe and welcoming environment, are now second-guessing their travel plans. Where Melbourne once felt like a haven of calm, it now feels more like a place where danger lurks around the corner. This shift has created a sharp contrast between the Melbourne of the past, the city celebrated for its safety and security, and the Melbourne of today, where the threat of crime now seems closer than ever. The very factors that made the city so appealing to both residents and tourists, its vibrant streets, cultural landmarks, and thriving economy, are now overshadowed by rising fears of becoming a victim of violent crime. Families and tourists alike are questioning, is this still the same city they once knew? Is Melbourne, a city so proud of its reputation for safety, becoming a place where the fear of crime now defines everyday life? Residents are grappling with a difficult reality. where the image of Melbourne as a top destination for safety and culture now seems to clash with the reality they experience. The numbers tell a concerning story, one that cannot be ignored. In recent years, Melbourne has seen a sharp and unsettling rise in violent crime. Once celebrated for its low crime rates and safe streets, the city is now grappling with an increase in assaults, thefts, and most alarmingly, armed robberies. These crimes, once sporadic and isolated, are now becoming disturbingly commonplace. In fact, reports from law enforcement show that violent crime in Melbourne has increased by nearly 15% over the past year alone. Breaking it down further, specific crime categories have spiked dramatically. Car thefts have surged, with vehicles being stolen in broad daylight, often in residential areas. Retail robberies have also become more frequent, with criminals targeting stores in busy shopping districts, sometimes even using weapons to intimidate employees and customers. And perhaps most alarming of all, violent street attacks have become a growing issue, with reports of random assaults in public spaces becoming increasingly regular. This includes everything from mugging incidents to physical altercations that escalate unexpectedly, leaving victims seriously injured. The question that now looms large for Melbourne's residents is, why is this happening? And how did a city once known for its safety become a place where these kinds of violent acts are now part of daily life? As the statistics paint a grim picture, public fear has taken hold. Residents who once walked freely through the city now find themselves questioning their surroundings. Public transport, a staple of Melbourne's urban life, has become a setting for violent incidents. Shopping centers, once bustling hubs of activity, are now viewed with suspicion as shoppers and business owners alike worry about becoming victims. Even residential areas, typically considered safe havens, have seen an uptick in break-ins and violent crime, something that was once seen as rare in these neighborhoods. The impact is palpable. Even as the overall crime rate rises, many Melbourne residents are not just worried about becoming a statistic, they're living with a growing sense of insecurity. They are asking themselves, is my neighborhood still safe? Can I go to the shops without the threat of being robbed? Should I reconsider using public transport after dark? What was once taken for granted, the idea that Melbourne was a city where you could walk the streets without fear, is now in question. This growing sense of unease has affected everyone, from longtime residents to newcomers. People are starting to feel like they are constantly on edge, aware of their surroundings, and questioning whether their city has truly become a place where crime is out of control. In a city that once felt relatively safe, several high-profile crime incidents have left both locals and outsiders in shock. Melbourne, a place where people used to feel secure even when walking at night or visiting bustling shopping districts, is now a city where random violence seems to be on a rise. The shift is alarming. What was once a peaceful, vibrant metropolis has now seen an uptick in incidents that are both violent and public. These attacks are no longer isolated to dark, hidden corners of the city. They are happening in broad daylight, in crowded, well-lit areas where you'd expect to feel safe. For example, one of the most shocking cases involve a random street stabbing in one of Melbourne's busiest districts. The victim, a passerby going about their day, was suddenly attacked without warning. The violence was quick, brutal, and unprovoked. The streets, once full of people casually strolling and enjoying their day, were now marked by a chilling reminder. No one was safe, not even in broad daylight. Another incident involved a violent mugging on a busy city street, where a woman was attacked by a group of young assailants who stole her handbag and left her bruised and shaken in front of bystanders. These are not just the types of events you hear about happening in quiet suburbs or outlying areas. They're occurring right in the heart of Melbourne. Then there are the armed robberies that have become a frequent occurrence in well-known shopping districts. One particularly brazen robbery happened during the Christmas shopping season in one of Melbourne's major malls. A group of armed robbers stormed a store, holding up employees and customers at gunpoint before fleeing with thousands of dollars in merchandise. This wasn't a crime that took place in the shadows. It happened in the open, in the midst of holiday shoppers, heightening the fear and unease among the public. These kinds of crimes, once rare in a city like Melbourne, are no longer isolated. The fact that they are happening in busy, public spaces where people are meant to feel the safest has sent shockwaves through the community. Melbourne residents, once accustomed to the security of their neighborhoods, are now grappling with the unsettling reality that no place is truly safe anymore. As these incidents continue to make headlines, the impact of media coverage cannot be understated. News outlets, social media posts, and local blogs all amplify the fear and perception of the city's growing danger. Each news story adds to the growing narrative that Melbourne is becoming a more dangerous place. As the media brings these incidents into the spotlight, the fear spreads. Social media amplifies this even further, with users sharing videos of violent crimes and debates about how to make the city safer. These viral posts further reinforce the idea that Melbourne's crime wave is out of control and that something needs to be done to restore safety. The more these incidents are reported, the more they fuel the perception that Melbourne, once known for its relaxed and safe atmosphere, is now a place where violent crime is lurking at every corner. Residents are worried and tourists are hesitant, with many questioning whether this will become the new norm for the city. For those living in Melbourne, it feels like the streets are no longer as inviting or as safe as they once were. One of the most concerning factors contributing to Melbourne's rising crime wave is the increasing involvement of youth offenders. While the city's crime surge affects people of all ages, a particularly alarming trend has been the growing number of young people involved in muggings, thefts, and violent street attacks. This has raised critical questions about why so many teenagers, many still in their adolescence, are resorting to such drastic measures. Recent reports suggest that youth crime is no longer limited to just a few isolated incidents. Rather, it's becoming a pattern. Teens are increasingly involved in violent acts, many of which occur in public spaces where the general public, unsuspecting and vulnerable, are often the targets. It's not just a few outliers. The statistics show that youth crime is on the rise in neighborhoods once thought to be safe. From armed robberies to street stabbings, these young offenders are showing a terrifying level of aggression and a lack of fear of consequences. So what's behind this troubling surge in youth violence? Experts suggest that the reasons are multifaceted. Economic hardship plays a significant role. Many of these teens come from families struggling to make ends meet, living in areas where opportunities for success are scarce. Social alienation is another key factor. Teens, especially those from marginalized communities, often feel disconnected from the society around them. When you're raised in an environment where opportunity is limited, it can foster feelings of frustration, anger, and hopelessness. For many of these young people, violence becomes a way to gain control, assert power, or simply survive. Peer pressure also plays a crucial role in escalating this behavior. In certain communities, gangs and peer groups can exert tremendous influence on teens. Some young people, in their quest for belonging or protection, may turn to crime as a means of fitting in. Youth gangs, in particular, can act as a powerful, negative force, leading kids down a dangerous path of criminal activity. The idea of loyalty to the group or the desire for status and recognition can push teens toward violent crimes, reinforcing the cycle of violence and criminal behavior. But the question remains, are these teens simply products of their environment, or should they be held accountable as adults for the crimes they commit? This has sparked a heated debate across the city and even the country about how to handle youth crime. On one hand, there's the argument that early intervention is key. Many believe that these teens need help, mental health support, access to education, and job opportunities to steer them away from the path of crime. Supporters of this view argue that we cannot simply punish these teens. We need to understand the root causes and offer solutions that address their struggles. On the other hand, there are those who argue that while intervention is important, stronger consequences are necessary to deter these young offenders from committing violent acts. With the rise of gang-related violence and escalating incidents of public attacks, many believe the time for leniency is over. Critics argue that tougher laws and harsher punishments may be the only way to send a clear message that violence is never acceptable regardless of the offender's age. This debate has become one of the focal points of Melbourne's crime discussion. Should we focus on rehabilitation and second chances, or is it time to take a firmer stance and hold these young people accountable for their actions? Some believe that the city's rising crime rate will only continue to spiral if these issues aren't addressed. Others feel that preventative measures, such as more access to youth programs, mental health services, and family support systems, will ultimately lead to a safer and more inclusive society. In response to the growing crime wave sweeping through Melbourne, local authorities have stepped up their efforts to address the situation, but the public's reaction has been mixed. The Victoria Police have increased their presence in high-crime areas, with officers now patrolling neighborhoods where violent incidents have become more frequent. Their presence is intended to offer a sense of security and deter would-be offenders from committing crimes in broad daylight. These efforts include random checks, increased surveillance, and visible patrols in areas that have been hit hardest by the rise in crime. At the same time, the Victorian government has made moves to implement tougher laws to combat the surge in crime, particularly regarding youth offenders. One of the most significant policy changes has been the introduction of tougher bail laws. These laws are designed to prevent repeat offenders, many of whom are young people involved in violent crimes, from being released back into the community too soon. By making it more difficult for these offenders to secure bail, the government aims to reduce the number of young offenders reoffending and wreaking further havoc on Melbourne streets. For some, these tougher policies are a step in the right direction. Supporters argue that stronger bail laws and harsher sentencing for repeat offenders are necessary to restore a sense of safety and deterrence in the city. Many believe that if the judicial system were to impose more severe consequences on those who commit violent acts, it would serve as a warning to others thinking of following the same path. They claim these measures are crucial for rebuilding public trust and ensuring that Melbourne is a safe place to live, work, and visit. However, there are significant critics of these measures who argue that they only address the symptoms, not the underlying causes of the crime wave. They contend that punitive measures alone will not solve the deeper societal issues at play. Many believe that focusing on policing and incarceration without addressing the root causes of youth violence, such as economic inequality, lack of educational opportunities, and family instability, will only lead to a revolving door of crime and reoffending. Critics argue that investing more heavily in mental health services, youth programs, and community support is the way forward. These services, they argue, would help prevent young people from turning to crime in the first place, rather than simply punishing them after the fact. Public backlash against the current approach has been widespread. Many Melbourne residents feel that despite the increased police presence and tougher policies, they're not seeing real change on the streets. Fear still lingers, and crime rates continue to rise, leaving people frustrated. There are growing calls for the government to invest more in preventative measures, such as programs that provide youth with mentorship, job training, and access to mental health resources. These programs could give at-risk individuals the tools they need to avoid falling into a cycle of crime. Some argue that only by addressing the systemic issues contributing to youth violence, such as poverty, lack of education, and mental health struggles, can Melbourne truly move toward a safer future. Until those issues are tackled, many believe that the city will continue to struggle with rising crime, and the police presence and tougher laws will remain only a temporary solution to a much larger, more complex problem. As Melbourne grapples with its escalating crime wave, there is a growing disconnect between public perception and the reality of crime rates. The fear of crime has become so pervasive that it now shapes the daily lives of many residents. People are anxious about their safety, whether they're out shopping, using public transport, or even walking through their own neighborhoods. Yet, while fear is mounting, the statistics don't always reflect the intensity of the public panic. In fact, crime statistics can sometimes tell a different story than the one being portrayed in the media. Yes, crime rates are rising, but the extent of the problem is often exaggerated by the media's coverage of high-profile incidents. Violent crimes, such as stabbings or armed robberies, naturally grab headlines, and these stories dominate public discourse. The media frenzy that surrounds these cases amplifies public fear, leaving many to believe that Melbourne is spiraling out of control. The truth is, while there has been a rise in certain crimes, the overall crime rate in Melbourne may not be as catastrophic as it feels. Some experts argue that sensationalized media reporting has contributed to the heightened sense of insecurity, making people feel unsafe even when the actual risks might not be as high as they perceive. Is it really as bad as it seems? That's the central question at the heart of this debate. Experts point out that while certain violent incidents have increased, many of these high-profile crimes are still relatively rare. The rise in crime, while concerning, does not necessarily mean that Melbourne is now a dangerous city in every corner. The reality is often more complex. Increased police presence, security cameras, and community safety measures have likely helped prevent even worse outcomes. Yet, the anxiety among the public persists, as they are bombarded by crime stories in the news and social media. It's important to distinguish between the real rise in crime and the anxiety that's been stirred by this media coverage. Some fear is natural, and safety concerns should be taken seriously. But it's equally important to recognize that Melbourne's reputation as a city in crisis may not match the reality of the day-to-day experience of most residents. Despite the crime wave, Melbourne is still a vibrant city, and the vast majority of people continue to live their lives without experiencing violent crime firsthand. However, the psychological impact of crime, fed by constant media coverage, can be just as harmful as the crime itself, affecting people's quality of life and their sense of security. Looking ahead, the real challenge for Melbourne is not just combating the rise in crime, but also finding a balance between the public's demand for tougher law enforcement and the need for long-term solutions to address the underlying causes of crime. Tougher policing, harsher sentences, and higher visibility of law enforcement are certainly necessary in the short term, but they're not enough to tackle the deeper issues at play, such as youth violence, social inequality, and mental health struggles. What Melbourne needs is a holistic approach, one that addresses the root causes of crime while also working to rebuild trust between the police and the public. Tackling economic disparity, providing better access to education and job opportunities, and investing in mental health resources could all play a role in reducing crime in the long run. It's not just about fighting crime. It's about preventing it before it starts. And to do that, the city needs to take a broader, more compassionate approach to safety and justice. The ripple effects of Melbourne's rising crime wave extend far beyond the streets and into the very fabric of the city's economy. While residents and tourists grapple with the fear of violent crime, local businesses are also feeling the impact. In particular, retailers in high-footfall areas, those bustling shopping districts and crowded streets that once felt like the heart of Melbourne, are now facing new, unforeseen challenges. Theft and violent crime are becoming increasingly common, and many business owners are taking drastic steps to protect their assets. To safeguard both employees and customers, many retailers have been forced to install extra security measures, such as surveillance cameras, security guards, and alarm systems. These added costs are putting a strain on businesses already struggling with the economic effects of the pandemic and rising expenses. In some cases, businesses are even limiting their operating hours, reducing the amount of time their doors are open to the public in order to mitigate the risk of violent encounters. This has led to a negative cycle. Crime makes businesses less profitable, and less foot traffic leads to even more crime. The once vibrant shopping districts of Melbourne are now increasingly viewed as potential crime zones, and many retailers fear that if this trend continues, it will take a long time to recover. But the effects of the crime wave extend even further into Melbourne's tourism sector, one of the key pillars of the city's economy. Melbourne has long been a top destination for international visitors, drawing tourists with its world-class cafes, art galleries, shopping districts, and rich cultural offerings. The city's reputation for being safe has been one of its main selling points. But with the rising incidence of violent crime in popular tourist areas, that reputation is now in jeopardy. Tourists, especially those visiting from overseas, are starting to rethink their travel plans. The fear that Melbourne, a city once considered one of the safest in the world, may no longer be as welcoming and secure is spreading. Incidents of crime near iconic tourist spots, like the Royal Arcade or Federation Square, have become more common. The media attention surrounding these incidents only fuels the perception that the city is no longer a haven for safe, enjoyable travel. If this trend continues, the city could face a significant drop in tourist numbers, which would have a devastating impact on Melbourne's economy. Hotels, restaurants, and tour operators are already reporting fewer bookings, and if the crime wave worsens, the tourism industry could take years to recover. But the financial impact of the crime wave doesn't stop there. Property values in some of Melbourne's more high-crime areas are also feeling the pressure. As the fear of crime grows, some residents are choosing to move away from neighborhoods that were once considered desirable, but have now seen an uptick in criminal activity. For many, safety has become a primary concern, and they're willing to pay higher rent or buy properties in quieter suburbs to escape the crime-ridden areas. This shift in demand for safer neighborhoods is impacting the real estate market, with some areas seeing a drop in property values while others are seeing a sharp increase in demand. The growing crime wave is reshaping Melbourne's landscape, not just physically, but economically. The once thriving retail and tourism sectors are now facing the reality that crime is no longer an isolated issue, but a widespread problem with deep-reaching consequences. The city's property market, once a symbol of stability and growth, is also being affected as residents look for safer places to live and invest. The fear that once loomed in the shadows is now reshaping how people live, shop, and even travel in Melbourne. The economic fallout from the rise in crime could be felt for years, and it's clear that addressing this crisis is not just about public safety. It's about protecting the future of the city's economy as well. As we look back at Melbourne's transformation from a once safe haven to a city struggling with rising crime, it's clear that the situation has left many questioning whether the city can ever return to its former status as one of the world's safest and most prosperous places. The crime wave has ignited a conversation that spans across neighborhoods, city halls, and even national discussions. From violent street attacks to armed robberies in once safe areas, Melbourne is confronting a challenge unlike any other in its recent history. The growing sense of fear among residents and tourists has forced both local officials and community leaders to reevaluate the way the city handles public safety, crime prevention, and support for vulnerable communities. For decades, Melbourne was the model of peace and prosperity, a city where families could walk the streets without fear and businesses could operate without worry. But with the rise in violent crime, Melbourne is now a crossroads. The question many are asking is, what can Melbourne do to restore its safety reputation? How can the city reclaim the confidence of its residents and tourists? One possible answer lies in balancing tough law enforcement with more preventative measures. We need to acknowledge that while a stronger police presence and tougher laws are necessary, they may not be enough to tackle the deeper issues at play. Melbourne faces a dilemma. Can it truly return to the city it once was, where safety was a given, or is this crime wave the new reality? If the rise in crime is a reflection of broader societal challenges, economic disparities, youth alienation, and lack of mental health support, how can we address these root causes in a way that will create lasting change? As we wrap up this discussion, I want to hear your thoughts. Do you think Melbourne can recover its safety reputation? Is it possible to restore the city's former sense of security? Or is this new reality something we must accept? And what about the growing problem of youth crime? How do we balance the need for stronger consequences with the need for rehabilitation and support for young people caught in the cycle of violence? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective is crucial to this ongoing conversation.